Hello, my name is Mark Gibson, and you're listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, a weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. A very good morning, everyone, and you're welcome to today's Signpost webinar. We hope you're all keeping safe and well. Today, we're going to be talking about nature-based solutions, and we're going to be taking a look at specific examples in Kilkenny. And so we'll be looking at examples that address issues relating to farmyard runoff before they reach watercourses. And we know that can be a problem in certain catchments. And we're delighted to be joined by Deirdre Glynn, who is a ASSAP advisor with Teagasc. Good morning, Deirdre.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. And Jim Croke, who is a catchment scientist with the River Basin Management Services, which was formerly known as LawPro. I hope I have got that correct, Jim.
Yeah, Mark, good morning. Thanks for having us.
Good morning. You're very welcome. And Méabh, good morning to you. Méabh, you're going to be helping us out with questions later on.
I am indeed, Mark. Yeah. Good morning, everyone.
So maybe, Jim, for those who aren't familiar with the organisation you're working with, formerly known as LawPro, maybe could you give us a little bit of background around the nature of the work that you do?
Well, I suppose there's two sides to the house with LawPro. Now the River Basin Management Service, there's a community side and the catchment science side. So I'm one of the catchment scientists, one of six based in the southeast here. I'm based in head office in Clonmel. So basically what we do is we look at the PAA's priority area actions, we assess the priority area actions, and we report on them, and then we refer them. So when we have an agricultural refer, then we will refer over to ASSAP. Basically, that's what we do, you know.
And that's a perfect cue for Deirdre. We live in a world full of acronyms at the moment. Can you maybe just remind everybody what the ASSAP program is and what your role is?
Yeah, so the ASSAP program is the Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advisory Program. So it's quite a mouthful. So we work with farmers to improve water quality on farms. And it's based on referrals on the catchment science that Jim Croke and the catchment science team, provide us. Also, I suppose we're Teagasc ASSAP, but we have Cheerlawn ASSAP as well. And now we have community animators working, a team of excellent advisors really working nationally.
Excellent. And you mentioned animators. Where do they fit in?
They work within the region, and they're a support to us doing, say, EIP plans or doing ASSAP assessments as well.
Great. We'll chat to you at the end of the presentation. So, Deirdre.
So good morning, everyone, and you're very welcome to County Kilkenny. Today, Jim Croke and I will talk you through the design, construction and observed results from a riparian buffer and a willow filter bed system that's working in an agricultural setting in County Kilkenny. So the presentation is really framed around three linked questions. First, what was the water quality problem at the farm and catchment scale? Secondly, how was the nature-based mitigation system designed and constructed? And thirdly, what evidence do we have from monitoring and the intervention that this is improving water quality? So the case study is based in the Brega Priority Area for Action in County Kilkenny, with input from Teagasc, the River Basin Management Service, ASSAP, Cheerlawn and Norvision, and most importantly, our farmer, Mark O'Brien. So the focus is quite practical. It's translating catchment science into a working farm scale measure.
Sorry, and the key measure, Deirdre, are you moving slides on there? Because
No. I'm still talking about the first slide. Yeah.
Okay.
So the key message here is that this is a targeted water quality intervention designed around source, pathway, receptor. So the structure of the presentation follows the advisory and technical process from catchment diagnosis to farm scale implementation. We begin with the Brega PAA context and then the drillings down where our riparian buffer is. We then move to issues identified on the farm, especially runoff sources and flow pathways. And then a key part of the presentation is the distinction between soiled water and clean water, because that distinction determines what can legally and technically enter a water-based treatment system. After that, we explain the mitigation measures, including the constructed wetland and the willow polishing area, then the planning and construction phase, And finally, the monitoring approach and early water quality results. The overall logic of this is to diagnose the pressure, identify the pathway, and interrupt the pathway and monitor the outcome. So Ireland still faces significant challenges in meeting its water quality directive objectives. As you can see, 54% of our water bodies are meeting surface water good status. So the important significant point or scientific point here is that nutrient transfer is rarely just about the presence of nutrients or sediment on land. It's all about connectivity. A source becomes a water problem or a pollutant when there is a pathway to the receptor. In this case, the receptor is the surface water. Riparian buffer zones work by interrupting that connectivity. They slow the runoff, encourage sediment deposition, support infiltration, and create a vegetated treatment interface before the water reaches the stream. This slide refers to the nature-based solution that it buffers, and it's a potential for substantial sediment reduction. Sediment can transport phosphorus and also pesticides, and the buffer is an interception. It's an interception measure. It does not remove the need for source control, but it does reduce the risk where pathways remain active. So ASSAP is important because it provides a trusted, farm-specific process rather than a one-fits-all prescription. The process begins with a catchment analysis where water quality pressures are identified at catchment and subcatchment analysis. This is followed by an ASSAP visit based on a referral from the scientists where the farmers walked with the farmer. This is essential because maps can indicate risk, but site assessment can show where water actually moves through the yard and across the land. The next step is pathway identification. Nutrient, sediment, and pesticide, if applicable, the pathways are mapped. Only then is the action plan agreed with the farmer. This particular sequence matters. If we select a measure before diagnosing the pathway, we spend money without addressing the actual pressure. So typical actions include farmyard runoff separation, better nutrient timing and placement, riparian buffers, sediment traps, fencing, and improved water trough placement. Where appropriate, ASSAP can also connect the farms to the Farming for Water EIP supports, and when this opens again. So the BREGA provides the catchment settlement for this work. This slide shows the local catchment assessment focus and the role of mitigation and measures through a nature-based solution. This is also a useful point to explain that the farm intervention sits within a wider catchment area and a management framework. The goal is not only to improve the conditions at one outfall or field boundary, but also to contribute to water quality improvements in the subcatchments. The mapping shows on the slide helps locate the BREGA PA and provides a spatial basis for later discussion of flow pathways, soil drainage risk, monitoring points, which you can see on the slide, and the farm's position within the catchment. When we located the catchment, the next step then is to summarise the specific issues and intervention sequence for the Mark O'Brien study case. So this slide really summarises a case study of 6 parts. So the location is in the Drillingstown, which is the focus of the catchment in County Kilkenny, and it's associated with the Brega stream and its subcatchment parcels. The catchment issues include point source discharge, overland flow, say septic tanks, animal access, and also HIMO pressures. The farm-specific challenge is the management of the clean water from the large farmyard, but also the pressure of a steep gradient of 16.8%. The mitigation system that we put in is a wetland system with its settlement ponds in series, followed by a polishing willow filter bed. A dye test confirmed the flow path on the 17th of September 2023, and the monitoring was designed around winter sampling from October to April across 5 different stations: the inlet, the outlet, upstream, downstream, and the farm reference point. This slide shows the practical timeline from assessment to monitoring. It's useful because it shows that a functioning buffer or wetland is not just created in one step. It develops through assessment, design, construction, protection, and monitoring. The initial ASSAP farm assessment took place in October 22, when yard water was tested on the silage slab base and a baseline contamination was recorded. This then promoted a further conversation about future-proofing the yard with the separation of clean and soiled water. In March 2023, wetland specialist Phelim Harty was consulted for design advice. By July 2023, nature wetland vegetation had been established. In August 23, we fenced it off to exclude livestock and protect establishment. And then we ran a green dye test in September 2023, which was a critical step, really. It mapped water movement, confirmed the flow path, and it identified any misconnections. From 2023 through to 2025, then water sampling continued to monitor performance and measure improvement. This slide explains the methodology used in the critical source area map. Okay, the first step was to map the farmyard. This means identifying upslope water, entry points, outfalls, soil drains, clean zones, separation points, runoff points, and routes. This is where the distinction between clean and dirty water begins to matter operationally. The second step was farmyard connectivity. So the EPA PIP maps were used to identify phosphorus risk paths, and high or very high overland flow pathways were mapped to the watercourse. Farm walks were then done to confirm source areas and assess whether natural topographic depressions could support buffer placement. The assessment considered soil drainage class, proximity to the watercourse, groundwater vulnerability, karst features, topography, gradient, natura sites, rainfall regime, and existing ecological assets. So the buffer was chosen, the location was chosen by combining mapped risk and field-confirmed hydrological connection. We looked at the gradient of the catchment, so this focuses on the slope and the runoff. So it's 16.8% steep slope. So the practical implications then are the runoff can accelerate very, very quickly, especially during rainfall events. So the steeper the gradients, the more increase of sediment and nutrient mobilization, because water has more erosive energy and residence time on the surface. So differentiating then between clean and dirty water. This is the most important technical and legal slide in the presentation. So soiled water is contaminated by feces, urine, or silage effluent and includes parlour and equipment washings. It must be stored and then land spread. It is strictly prohibited from the nature-based wetland, such as the willow filter bed or riparian buffer. Clean water includes runoff from clean roofs, concrete yards, free of fecal contamination. This is the water that may be directed into our willow bed or riparian buffer, provided source separation is effective. The practical yard management measures are therefore central to the success of the system. This slide provides the farm and the intervention within the farm, the water framework directory boundary and monitoring context in the Brega. The map shows the subcatchment and the relationship to the EPA Q station, investigative monitoring points. It matters because farm scale measures need to be interpreted in a catchment monitoring framework. So monitoring status is not just about compliance reporting, it also guides where advisory efforts can be focused and helps determine where observed local pressures are consistent within wider catchment signals. This slide therefore links local measures back to the WFD classification and catchment. So as you can see, the Brega at the moment is at moderate. So this is a drone. The slide shows the construction phase from an aerial perspective. The wetland or buffer zone is visible to the right-hand side in Mark's place. The value of this image is to show the spatial relationship between the treatment area and the farm runoff pathway and the riparian corridor. So nature-based solutions still require correct siting, of course, earthworks, hydraulic routing, vegetation establishment, and ongoing protection. The earlier view also helps communicate scale. So a buffer or a willow bed must be large enough to receive the contributing water attachment and shape so that the water spreads and slows rather than short-circuiting through a single channel. So this slide provides the strongest evidence from the original farmyard pressure. So this was the water off the side slab base, which Mark asked us to test. And then our conversation started about future-proofing the yard and clean waters and dirty water separation. So as you can see, the BOD level is 474 times the limit. So this suffocates fish by removing oxygen. The phosphorus is 340 times the limit, and this promotes excessive algae. And then the ammonia is 27 times the limit. So this is toxic to aquatic life. So this data obviously suggests a strong point source in the yard, signal from the side slab base. So the advisory implication here is clear. Focus first on the source control. Keep the dirty water out of the clean water drains. Intercept and reduce, contain nutrient-rich runoff before it reaches our receiving waters. And in Mark's case, the effluent has absolutely been collected. Here we're looking at soil type. So this slide shifts attention from the yard to the wider catchment context. Sizing affects the hydraulic. Within the drilling stand then, the catchment shows a gradient from poorly drained soils, high-risk soils, to better drained, lower-risk soils. So the slide also identifies blue zones as being wet, high-risk areas with direct hydraulic connectivity, and the farmyard is marked there with an X. Mark O'Brien's farm is shown there. It's in a high-risk phosphorus zone with a direct pathway from the Brega River. And that matters because poorly drained soils can increase surface runoff and can also reduce the capacity for water to infiltrate before reaching a stream. So this reinforces the measures needed to slow and intercept surface pathways. It also shows why the same farm practice can have different water quality connectivities or consequences depending on soil drainage, class and connectivity. So this slide shows the accumulation and surface pathway around the farmyard and his farm, which is adjacent to that. So the pathway analysis for the subcatchment. The boundary overlays or delineates the drillings down 10, and the amber or orange zones show where the surface water concentrates. Mark O'Brien's farm location is identified on the top right, as you can see, and the important part here is that the farm is not assessed in isolation. It is assessed in relation to where water flows after leaving the yard or leaving the field area. We're looking here at flow pathways analysis, and this is particularly valuable because it helps target interventions. A buffer located away from an active pathway may look good on paper, but deliver limited water quality benefits. A buffer located and confirmed in a confirmed pathway has a much higher chance of interrupting the stream, interrupting the transfer of nutrients to the stream. So just a very quick synopsis. This slide shows the sizing logic for the buffer. So the contributing area, as you can see here, is over 12,000 metres squared. Or is it? Okay, so Jim will do the maths on that. The minimum buffer is calculated using the 10% rule. Okay, and then the sizing affects the hydraulic residence time, the loading rate, and the likelihood that sediment filtration and biological uptake can occur effectively. Undersizing risks bypass, short-circuiting, or overload. And now a very important slide as well is our Irish legal framework. So this slide brings together the technical design back to statutory compliance, which is very, very important in our work. So the Water Framework Directive requires good ecological status. The Water Pollution Act prohibits causing or permitting water pollution. The Inland Fishery Guidance, including consultations for works near watercourses and preferred construction timing to protect spawning gravels. And then the agricultural regulations include mandatory uncultivated buffer zones along watercourses, livestock exclusion requirements in relevant situations, and soiled water versus clean water distinction. protection sites and biodiversity requirements may also need assessment and constant. And the message here is that a nature-based solution must both be technically proficient and sound, but also legally compliant. And now Jim will take over.
Okay, thanks, Deirdre. Look, folks, I'm just going to give you a whistle-stop tour here, and I'm just going to cover some of the design considerations, the percolation testing, the regulatory requirements. We're going to look at the schematic and see actually how the wetland works itself, construction overview, and some funding opportunities. And before I do, I'd like to just acknowledge some stakeholders again: Mark O'Brien, the farmer, ASSAP, ourselves, RBMS, Tyrone, Teagasc, IFI, Phelim Harty Wetland and Design, Norvision, and some of the local authorities that were actually there on the day. So now Deirdre had highlighted that the overall area of the farm was over 12,000 square meters. But when we looked at the catchment area of the yard and the machinery and one or two of the roof spaces that were in there, we were actually only dealing with about 5,649 meters squared. So the primary design build, once we took the roof space out of that, only left us with about 3,268 meters. It was designed then under an M560 period, which gave us 17 mil of rain, and that calculation then told us that we would have had a surge then of about 55.5 cubic meters. When we look at the rainfall and surge assessment there briefly on it, you can see on the left-hand side of the slide here our storm return period. So your M5, which would be a 5-year return for Kilkenny for this area that we were in, was 17 mil. M25 then would be 33 mil, and an M100 then is 50 mil in this area. And when we take climate change into consideration from OPW recommendation of 20%, that would have equated then to 60 mil of rain. On the right-hand side here, when we see the storm volume comparison representative again for our 3,268 meters squared, our M5 would have given us 55 as highlighted, and M100 then would have generated 163.4 cubic meters. And M100 plus climate change again would have generated then 196.8. So this would have brought us into an overflow system. When we look down on the system capacity, apologies, the sediment trap that we had there started off at about 50 centimeters, grading back up to about 30 centimeters, and the capacity of that was only about 4 square meters. Now, that's not included in the surge capacity. The settlement ponds altogether then were given us a normal flow level of 53.79 meters cubed. So our total peak capacity of the system was 161.38. The M100 with climate change would have generated 196.8 meters cubed. So we would have had an overflow of 35.42 meters. Now, to say, I'll talk about that a little bit more anyway. I'll explain that a bit more. Stage 2 then is, stage 1 then is everything is contained. Stage 2 overflow. We'll talk about that in a second. Looking at some of the percolation testing, when we done some testing on the site, then we were hoping to have some heavy clay soils at the site. We didn't. What we ended up with was silty loam, which was ideal. We'll talk about a bit more for our willow bed, but it wasn't ideal then. It just meant that we would have had leaching then at the site. So if we look at the soil type and suitability here, we can see that poorly draining soil is ideal for the small scale wetland. So we had to actually import some soil from another part of the farm to seal the bottom of our small scale wetland. We had free draining soil, so we were happy with that for our willow bed filtered area. Some regulatory requirements to look at. So if you're in an SAC, an SPA, an NAHA, appropriate assessment might be required. Some mandatory consents then that you will have to get us from the NPWS, IFI, and the local authority planning department, and OPW if you're in a flood relief area. Here's a schematic now of how it works. So on the top line here, we can see our sediment trap, which flows then down into a settlement pond. This schematic has 2 ponds. In reality, we have 3 on our own. Another thing then to highlight here is the splash rocks, because we did say that we had to import heavy soil to seal the bottom of this pond. So we didn't want any water dripping off the bottom off the pipe and actually eating its way down and giving us a short circuit actually to the water course. So our primary treatment is done with the sediment. Our secondary stage is done through the settlement ponds, and then the tertiary side of it then is done through the vegetated bund area, which I'll show you shortly, and then into the willowed area. On the bottom, we can see the end view of it here, and we can see the bund on either side and an end bund. You can see the still water level at 300 millimeters. The idea for still water at 300 millimeters is for denitrification, but especially in the last pond. Our overflow then will come over. We have our normal flow level is through a couple of holes, through a couple of pipes, so it can bleed out nice and easy. Each pond can bleed within each other. On a higher level, then it can flow over at 600, but at 900 mil, then there is a protection. This is where the stormwater protection comes into play and our overflow. When the overflow comes in under high level, it is all actually contained within the 3 ponds. However, they're hydraulically linked at this stage. Just to get in briefly into the bund design here, I won't get into it too much, but look, just some ideas on it. It's the bund base then has to be a minimum of 1.2 meters. Bund height has to be half a meter to 1 meter above the operating water level. And also then as well, the compaction, which is the key thing to take away from here. So every time when the bund is under construction, every 150 mil of a lift, you want to be vibrating plate that lift, or if at all possible, rolling it with a smaller roller. Here is an image now of the 3 settlement ponds that we have done, and the river is to the left-hand side, and you can see that the natural vegetated area, there's 3 meters of that, and it has not been disturbed. The pipe on the right-hand side is coming from our sediment pond into our first settlement pond. You might notice as well the yellow flag that's within it on the right-hand pond. We've, heavy densification of flagger in there, but it stops halfway down on the second pond there. And again, that is for denitrification. In plan, we can see then this is the site. So this is our sediment pond, which bleeds in then into our first settlement, second, third, and then over onto the vegetated bund. I think the vegetated bund, this is a very important thing to highlight. So I'm looking downstream now, and the ponds are behind me, and the flow is going down here. We can see the bund along on the right-hand side, some young willow taking shoot there on top of the bank for stabilization. Again, the natural habitat has not been disturbed within 3 meters of the river, and it's nicely vegetated. And again, yellow flag inside, and then again, that vegetated area then flows down into our willowed area then, which is our final polishing. Okay, the monitoring points then as well. So when we did some winter monitoring over this, we would have took a homogenized sample from the sediment pond and then from the last settlement pond. We weren't able to take any samples down along the vegetated area, thankfully, because we didn't have ponding or anything, which is exactly what we wanted to see. A very brief overview here on the construction process. So site prep, compliance, basin excavation and molding, your sealant, your compaction techniques as mentioned, your piping and your sill trap installation then as well. So what we've done here as well, we've done a dye test as Deirdre did mention. So the idea was to trace any flow paths and detect any shortcuts that would be there. So being our primary pond, so the contaminant is quite high. Well, we would consider it to be quite high in the first pond. So we wanted to ensure that we didn't have any seepage or short circuit down to the river. It was just really to verify the integrity of the system. Again, just an overview on some of the plant species that are there, your yellow flag and stuff on the left-hand side, and your willows then on the right-hand side for your willow bed filter at the final stage of it. Mentioned some funding opportunities here. So funding from the EIP, there was 60 million allocated from 23 to 27. These measures can be applied. So measure 28 would be your willow filter bed, and measure 29, sill traps and settlement ponds. And also there is other funding there available under clean water and storage. We did take some monitoring, and the monitoring points as I showed. Now I want to highlight that this is a winter performance data. So our main concern here was that wetlands can be known to reverse in the winter and contribute ammonia to the watercourse. So under 2023, the first year, if we look at the ammonia on the top line there was a 3 milligrams per litre coming in, and then it was dropping it down to 0.53. So there was a reduction of 83%. Staying with 2023, the BOD did increase. However, the ammonium did not go up. So I would have said that there was probably decayed vegetation that was in it. So I'm happy enough with that for the first year. P did increase again. In the second year, there was some works going on up in the yard, and that's what I think where we can see the high BOD on this. But there was a reduction then of ammonium then of 96%. The BOD was reduced by 49%, and total P was reduced by 48%. 2025 is what we feel is our established year. We were very happy to say that we had a 94% reduction from what was going into the settlement pond and coming out of the into the sediment and out of the settlement pond. Not 4% reduction in BOD, an 80% reduction. And again, this is over a winter sampling process. So some common pitfalls: bypass, short circuits through the bund, undersizing the system, that's probably one of the keys, and bund failure again, pipe blockage, so a bit of maintenance there as well, and then watching your willow bed establishment. Long-term maintenance off that, again, checking your silt traps, maintaining then the pipes and stuff like that, that we don't get any blockage and overflow, stuff like that, and your bund integrity then again. Vegetation management, and looking after them that, maybe sometimes if the vegetation got too high, that you might remove 70 to 80% to reduce that BOD load that's in the winter months. Take home messages on this, conscious of time here, guys. So it's a small footprint with a big impact. It's a measured treatment with performance, and establish it. It does take a little bit of time to establish, but if you have design maintenance, it does give you performance, and it's a practical farm solution. So, folks, that's all I got. So, thanks very much.
It's great. Thank you so much, Deirdre and Jim. Really comprehensive view of that case study there, and again, thanks to Mark for allowing us to use his farm as an example. It's sometimes not always easy thing to do. And I like that phrase, a small footprint with a big impact. It certainly seems to, based on the figures that you presented there, Jim, seems to have a very high impact, all right. In terms of the scalability of this and use on other farms, what sort of specialist knowledge is required to actually design and also then to construct these successfully? And I imagine there's some management required as well.
There is some management required from it. Between Deirdre and myself, we knew what we wanted to achieve. But again, that we're not wetland engineers. So that was where Fail and Harty came into that as well. From a sizing perspective then as well, an integrated wetland is 2.5 times the farm size. When we were able to fine tune what was going on in the farm, we were able to work out that we were only dealing with, say 3,500 meters squared. So we knew then that, we can get away with here a very small area. If it's managed correctly and everything is set in motion, we could work. And we're happy to say, from the results in our established 2025 year, that did work and pay off for us, Mark,
So I imagine, Deirdre, that the starting point is to try and minimise that volume going in the first place.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I suppose when we first went out in the catchment in 2022, Matthew Moylan and myself, Matthew was from Chirlawn, went out and we did a joint visit to a dairy farm and some of the dairy farms within the area. And I suppose all the conversation at the time would have been about new regulations and the regulations coming down the track and future-proofing the farm for these impactful regulations coming down the line, especially in respect to soil, water and slurry storage. So on our visit to the farm, Mark mentioned to us about Jim. Jim was spotted doing his catchment walks in the Brega catchment by a number of farmers. And he asked me, what's Jim like? Is he sound? Is he approachable? Because I'd really like him, to come and throw his eye over. Three heads are better than one. And I
Hmm.
suppose, as Jim said, it's not an unusual scenario to bring a catchment scientist into the yard as such, to put the solutions in place. He's usually trying to pinpoint the issues or the pressures within the area. So the conversation went on anyway, and we included Jim. So we tested the water. We walked the yard. We looked at the clean water yard areas and the potential clean yard areas, and how could he reduce the flow of water. Now, because he had a 16% gradient as well, there was serious pressure coming from up above the farmyard.
Hmm.
So the three of us came up with the idea of running a drain across to stop that particular water, and it was diverted through this drain straight into the river, which reduced hugely the amount of clean water that was coming down onto the yard. So that was our first intervention. And there was also a roadway adjacent to the farmyard, again, with a steep slope down into the farmyard area. So we had that cambered. Obviously, it was cambered, but we put bumps on it along the way, or speed bumps, to try and
Hmm.
divert the water into the field. So they were two big measures. Well, they were small measures, but they had big impact on the yard. So then we went over to the silage slab base, and it was a clean silage slab base, a little bit of silage maybe on it, and we measured the nutrient, and that happened to have a very when the results came back, it was kind of shocking because it looked like clean water. Now Mark was already controlling the water that was going on to the silage slab base, but we were surprised at the results, at how how potent the nutrient was on the area. So then the conversation came, how can I future-proof? He had to put in a new shed, some new tanks, but the water was still an issue because he has a huge yard area. So we tried to minimize the amount of water. So instead of having that 12,000 plus meters squared area, we reduced it to just over 3,000. So that's the catchment area for the buffer. So that was the conversation. So, the nature-based solution came as a conversation between the three of us. We'd seen it a few times on training days. And we thought that, because the farmyard was located, he had an area of ground underneath the farmyard, so the flow would go down straight into it. He was, I think with these riparian buffers, there's a huge amount of trust that would need to be taken with farmers that putting it in, that it is just for clean water. It's not for soil water. It's not for slurry. We had that conversation, and he was really, really willing to put it in. He'd
Hmm.
seen it before. He'd seen that it worked, and he was open to the concept. And I suppose from there, with three heads together, and with Phelim Harty and with Nora Vision and everybody working together, we got the buffer in place. But I suppose when we were planting the buffer, then we invited loads of people to the planting. I was trying to cut down on labour because we didn't want to have to plant all the flaggarts ourselves.
Mm.
But we had maybe about 40 people that were invited, from engineers in the county council. IFI were there. All the dignitaries were really there. We had Teagasc personnel, ASSAP personnel. So we were all there together, and we planted it. And it was a lovely day. And people have been following it ever since, because
Yeah.
they were actually invested in it. And it's
Mm.
fantastic, that Mark is so invested in it, because, clean water is an issue, like, where does it go? Like, we're doing some planning permissions with farmers here in Kilkenny. I was talking to some of the advisors, and, new constructions, even the roof water, the clean roof water and new constructions can't go directly into a river. So you have to have some sort of a buffer between it. So, there is a place for the
Mm.
buffer, but there is an element of trust also that needs to be, considered.
Mhm. And just to understand that point there, a lot of people would have assumed that roof water would be allowed to go directly into the river. What are the risks there?
Yeah, there's different regulations in every different county council, I think,
Okay.
throughout the country. But I have seen in Kilkenny where on a new construction, it's quite a large construction, they don't even want the roof water to go directly into a drain or a stream. So it has to be filtered in either a soak pit or go into one of these systems before it makes contact with the river.
Very good. Maeve, lots of really good questions coming through there.
Yeah, look, got a huge amount of interest in it, and I think it speaks to the quality of the project and the presentation. That there's so much interest in it. I guess kind of two of the main kind of themes regarding the questions
Maeve,
that are coming in at the
I'm
minute
afraid your
is
your sound is quite gone funny on us there. It's not
can you hear
There's a
me
good
okay?
question. There's a good question in there from Cathal Summers in relation to the management of this, and also around the sediment trap. I might just jump in there. So yeah, in the maintenance of that, the sediment trap would have to be cleaned out, but you really, it hasn't been cleaned out in 5 years in this one. But when it does get cleaned out, it gets actually land spread. It goes back to the dung heap, and you're actually recycling your nutrients then. So you should have a lot of phosphorus going back in. So you have nutrient recycling. Again, that would be done very carefully then as well, depending on whether you have a line system or what way you are with that. In relation, then there was another question I just saw there: is there continued monitoring from an NBS perspective? Yes, there is, and just to mention, Vision will be doing some monitoring on this on an ongoing basis. Because we're in the PAA, we were able to cover the monitoring over for the couple of years while we were there, but that will be going on to Vision now for that. So just to say thanks. One last question there in relation to funding around the EIP. I might just jump in and say, yes, there is funding available for invasive species. I know that through the Community Development Fund, people along rivers and farmers have availed of this in the past, where they were able to apply for funding and treat invasive species along it. And I know that there's one going up around the Tone Kappa White stream as well. So that's three questions there ticked off.
Okay. Great.
I'll
Thank you.
just, sorry, I'll
Can I
just jump in
can
there
I
with the
just
nutrients.
I just want to check that Maeve's sound is
Oh, yeah.
back with us.
Yeah, can you hear me better there, Mark? Is that any
Uh,
better?
not entirely, I'm afraid. Maybe if you have a
Okay,
different
sorry about
microphone,
that. I'll
you
see
you
if
can
I
select.
can get it sorted.
Okay. Thanks. Sorry, Deirdre.
Yeah, just in respect to the sediment and it being high in nutrient, that we need to be very careful, especially in that particular catchment, because it's so slopey. Like he's got a 16-degree slope, and that's
Mm.
kind of representative of the slopes within the area. So we have to keep our buffers. We have to encourage farmers to keep our buffers, but we also have to be very cognizant of the indexes that nutrient is going out on and targeted to the higher indexes, and also then keep don't apply when rainfall is forecasted, especially poignant in this particular area with the slopes and the potential for the
Mm.
nutrient to get in. So keep your buffers. Very, very
Yeah.
important
But
message.
wouldn't it be an awful waste having gone to that trouble of constructing this amazing feature and then undoing all the good work by spreading the
Well,
soil
yeah, nutrient is money as well,
Absolutely.
It's
Yes. Yes.
lost from your pocket. So
Yes, yes, yes. Just quite a few questions coming through there around the funding side of things. Where are we at in terms of that current funding cycle in relation to the EIP, Deirdre, and then for people who are outside of those priority action areas, is there what funding could be available there? Maybe you, Jim, feel free to jump in there afterwards as well.
yeah, so with the EIP, Mark actually put in the wetland buffer before the EIP was actually inaugurated.
Okay.
So he did it off his own bat. But we've had a number of farmers who've put them in, like based on the science that we've seen in this, and then some of the work done by Phelim Harty and some of my colleagues nationally. have put in buffers based on the science from this one, and they've been funded. Yeah, absolutely. They can be funded through the bespoke measure, for the construction. And then there's also the willow bed filter, which is another option to be taken under the EIP. Now, some of these wetland buffers also can have, or willow beds can have a tank at the beginning of them. Now, Phelim Harty wasn't massively in favour. He wanted to have a sediment drop for the sediment and the particulate in the first pond. But there is money up to the tune of about 6,500 for a separation tank. It's a two-stage tank for the sediment to drop and then circulate through the system. So that's there. Now, at the moment, the IP is closed. And we're hoping that it opens in the near future. So, and I don't know what form it's going to take going forward. But Jim would have been eligible because he's within a priority area for action. And I think going forward, any of the mitigation measures and the funding will be towards lands and farms within the priority areas for action are high nitrate area zones. And if you want to add anything to that.
No, not really, yeah. But I think going forward, that's where the EIP will be looking and concentrating on, is where the referral areas are coming from the River Basin Management Service to ASSAP. They will get the first priority and stuff in that. In relation to funding, no, I don't really have much more to add on that.
Okay.
Hopefully that's a little bit better, Mark.
Much better.
Good. Just there's a good few questions there as well in terms of is there an estimate for roughly the cost to implement a system like this?
I can say roughly how much it was. So Phelim, I think he's something over €1,000 to draw up the plan. Then the digger work, or the digger for the day, was about €1,500. And then the wetland plants, which can be sourced locally, or they can be sourced through Phelim or other suppliers. I think that came to about €1,400. And that's it really. We were free, weren't we, Jim?
We were free, yeah, indeed we were. But Nor Vision actually helped us out with the funding then. That was actually a leader funding that we got actually for Phelim in this specific instance.
Yeah, but again, I mean, when we think about maybe the costs associated with getting maybe an inspection and things, maybe being traced back to the yard, it's a very worthwhile investment over time.
Absolutely.
Especially when you see the reduction in the nutrients coming out, I mean, it's clear to see that it's an investment that has a significant impact on the output of nutrients. So, it's not that large of a cost for a farm that, of that scale. It sounds like a fairly big farmyard and stuff like that. So, definitely worthwhile by the sounds of things. And I guess actually just on that, when we think about implementing these sort of measures on farms, cost is maybe one barrier, but another thing that is really important is keeping the farmers on side and, making sure that they are open to the idea. And from what you're saying, this farmer was very open to it, but, how important was your own relationship with the farmer, Deirdre? And, and what about maybe other farmers who wouldn't be as proactive as this farmer was? How do you think the best way to go about that is to encourage adoption of these kind of measures?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I suppose Mark and I have a good relationship. I started visiting him as part of the program, so he contributed to the pressure, I suppose, within the catchment. Him and other farmers did. So it started off as an awkward conversation, and it kind of developed through visiting and engagement into a very good working relationship. The fact that he was open to the idea, he had seen it working before. Okay, he had visited. He's very open-minded as a person as well, and he has a lovely affinity with nature. as well. Like he has pheasants, and he's just, he kind of brags about the amount of biodiversity and hedges and that he has on the farm. So he's that way minded anyway. So that was an easy conversation and an easy move towards the wetland buffer. So that conversation was easy enough. The money end of things, if he was to put in a tank to hold all that water, it would have cost him a fortune, an absolute fortune. So that's another conversation, the separation of the clean and the dirty water. And then I suppose, he's bringing people. Nor Vision were fantastic. They brought groups of people from towns, schools out to see the buffer and to see what the farmer was doing for nature, but also for water quality and for biodiversity. So that's it. So then from that conversation, so like he's one of these kind of, he's an important person or a peer within the farming community. And from that then, some farmers have visited, and some very large dairy farmers and very large beef farmers, prominent people and prominent farmers have taken these actions on board and put in these wetland buffers, especially through Nor Vision. There's quite a number of them being trialled now at the moment as well, through it and funded through Leader, which is fantastic.
Something you touched on there, Deirdre, that I think, it's come in one or two comments as well, that's really just seems to be very important with these kind of measures. You mentioned before this was implemented on the farmer had already seen a similar system in operation. And, you're talking about Nor Vision bringing out groups and stuff and that was a comment that is brought in, like, this is the kind of thing that we need, maybe discussion group members getting out and seeing, the more the farmers see these systems in action and how well they're working for other farmers, the more likely they are to maybe be implemented.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no, Teagasc bring out groups now. The dairy advisors, the beef advisors have brought out groups to look at the buffer and to look at the stats, to see how it's working and to see how it actually fit in with their system,
Yeah.
And can I ask you, do you think there's an opportunity here to the case studies like this to feed into other funding schemes such as the TAMS or other Department of Agriculture schemes? I know typically nature-based solutions wouldn't always have featured there, but it appears to me that there's a strong case here for that. Maybe Jim, if you'd like to take
Yeah,
that.
I think so. And I mean, that's really why we wanted to monitor it and to kind of have a bit of evidence to say, look, this is what we've done, this is what we found, these are our calculations. So, we know nature will inevitably fix itself in time, but that takes time. So, that's why nature-based solutions now, you can see so much of it going on in the urban setting as well, retaining the water, slowing down the flow and trying to uptake these things. So I'm hopeful. I would be very optimistic, and I would love to see more nature-based solutions coming onto farms, and hopefully the likes of TAMS and stuff will expand and accept grants and give us funding for the likes of these projects. There was a very interesting question there. Well, it was like, is there a maintenance manual for this? And unfortunately not. There is not. There's maintenance guidance on it. But if you're working with your engineer, if you have Phelim or something like that, Phelim will give you the basic rundown. And again, Deirdre or your ASSAP advisor will give you a rundown on maintenance and what you need to watch and what you need to do around that side of it. So I hope that answers that question as well.
Yeah, it kind of comes with a health warning as well. It's not something that you can just go out and do.
It's a work in
You
progress.
can wake up. Yeah, it's not something that you wake up in the morning and you say, yeah, I think I'll do this. There's a lot of engineering goes into it. There's a lot of soil science that goes into it, and but it's absolutely worth it. We can see from the results here and from the buy-in from high profile farmers here in Kilkenny that they're willing to put this system in and test it and see how it goes, and it's showing very, very good results.
I think we have 4 more on the back of this one as well, Deirdre. Isn't that fair to say?
We do on very large dairy farms. Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So very, very quickly, if a farmer is interested in introducing such a feature or solution on their farm, what would you suggest as a first step that they should take?
Contact their local ASSAP advisor.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay.
And Jim. We'll give out Jim's mobile
You will not.
to everyone.
If you see your local catchment scientist trudging through the fields, don't be afraid to say hello.
There might be some knocks on your door in the morning, Jim. So brilliant. Well, look, I'm afraid we're right out of time. But thank you so much for sharing that case study with us, and congratulations to you both, and to Mark as well. It's a great example of collaboration, and I thought it was a great idea bringing in all of the engineers and the fisheries people to help out with the planting as well. I thought that was very, very innovative. Méabh, thanks for the questions, and sorry your microphone was coming and going there throughout, so we'll have to invest in an upgrade.
Yeah, apologies for that.
No problem at all. Look, before we leave, I just want to let you know that next week we're going to be joined by Dr. Paul Crossan, who's going to be sharing some of the messages that came from this week's beef event that took place in Grange in County Meath. A huge event that Teagasc hosted that was directly for beef farmers, looking at all aspects of beef farming, but particularly on the sustainability side of things. So Paul is going to join us next Friday for that. So until then, thanks again for tuning in.
You've been listening to the podcast version of the Teagasc Signpost Series, the weekly webinar that promotes and examines sustainability in Irish farming. Don't forget to join us live every Friday morning for our latest webinar. For more, visit teagasc.ie. And you can also rate, review, and subscribe to the Signpost Series on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I'm Mark Gibson, and thanks for listening.